you have Bibles, you might want to take a look at Judges chapter 16. Judges chapter 16. I want to thank Steve for rescuing me last week when I didn't have any voice. Good to have friends. All right. I don't know if you remember what was on the radio 32 years ago, but that was when Michael Jackson recorded a song that talks about looking in the mirror. It says, I'm going to make a change. For once in my life, I'm going to feel real good. Going to make a difference. Going to make it right. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. Well, today Samson's going to take a look in the mirror, and he's going to start with the man in the mirror and just see if that man can change his ways. It's not going to be easy for Samson looking into the mirror, because Samson has eye trouble, which became clear to us in chapter 14 when Samson, unafraid of anything, wanders into Philistine territory just out of curiosity. And it says, he saw there a young Philistine woman. And what he saw with his eyes clouded his vision of his God-given mission and clouded his judgment. And he admits to his parents, I'm hooked. I saw this woman and I'm totally off the rails. I'm totally out of my head about her. And it might ruin my life, but I'm going to marry her anyway. You ever heard that story before? Well, today Samson's getting to the point where he needs to take a good long look in the mirror. But time after time, his eye trouble gets in the way. All right, have a look at it. Judges chapter 16. One day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. There's Samson's eye trouble right there. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, Samson is here. So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, at dawn we'll kill him. Well, Gaza is a Philistine city. Samson had no business being there unless he was there to fulfill his God-given mission, which was to save Israel from the Philistines, who wanted to annihilate Israel, and God wasn't going to allow that to happen. That's why God needed Samson and appointed Samson to kill Philistines. If Samson's not there in Gaza to do that, he shouldn't be there. It's only going to cause trouble for him, and his eye trouble acts up here. And he ends up spending the night with a prostitute. And the Philistines see an opportunity here. They're very much afraid of this ferocious guy, but they wait all night trying to get up their courage to do something to him in the morning. All right, verse 3. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate together with the two posts and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. So instead of attacking Samson's chicken-hearted enemies, watch him rip their city gates right out of their foundation and watch him carry this thing, hundreds of pounds, probably a ton or so, the 20 miles that he carried it back to Hebron, where he set it up on a hill so that the people of Israel can have a good laugh and be encouraged that their leader is actually doing something to help them. So once again, God is bringing good out of bad, and God is using Samson to help Israel in spite of Samson's reluctance to be faithful and his ongoing eye trouble. Verse 4, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah, another Philistine woman. It's a pattern developing. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. So there are 5 rulers of the 5 Philistine cities, and they decide on a price of 5,500 shekels of silver. We find out in the next chapter, Judges chapter 17, that a reasonable annual salary was 10 shekels of silver. So Delilah, who likes Samson well enough, is offered 550 years' salary, many, many millions of dollars. She just won the Powerball lottery. So what happens here? Well, it's not unexpected. We can sort of understand why Delilah did what she did. You would have done it too, for billions of dollars. So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Now, Samson knows the answer to this. He knows that his spiritual life is not in very good shape right now. There's not much left of his Nazirite vow, other than the fact that he hasn't cut his hair. And Delilah knows nothing about this. She knows nothing about Samson being called by God to be a lifelong Nazirite. So Samson toys with her, and he makes up a fictitious answer about how he can be subdued. It's in verse 7. Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Now remember, Samson shouldn't be there at all, but no doubt he killed all these guys that were hiding in the room. And so God is using Samson for his own purposes in spite of Samson's unfaithfulness. God is using Samson to do damage to the Philistines. That's what God needs Samson to do. Otherwise, the line of Judah, Jesus our Savior, cannot come. That's God's plan. He has to keep these people alive. So he's using Samson to do that. Verse 10, Then Delilah said to Samson, "You've made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. So far, so good. If you've been wondering what Samson's hair looked like, we're going to find that out right now. Verse 13. Delilah then said to Samson, "All this time you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied." He replied, "If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin and the loom with the fabric. I think this is my very favorite Samson adventure of them all. He stands up with this enormous ancient loom machine attached to his head, and he just has to swing his head from side to side to kill Philistines who are trying to attack him in that little room. Verse 15, Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more, he has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Now, I think in Sunday school they told me that Samson lost his strength when Delilah cut off his hair, but that's only a very partial explanation. Samson lost his strength because he turned his back on his Nazirite vow. He turned his back on his God-given mission. He turned his back on God. And the strength of the Lord left Samson. It really had nothing to do with his hair and everything to do with the unfaithfulness of his heart. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain." While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them." Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. And let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had led Israel 20 years. So in the end, no more eye trouble for Samson. But what's Samson going to see in the mirror? Judges chapter 16 verse 22 says, "But the hair on his head began to grow again." Here's a question. How long was Samson's hair when he died? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. He was letting it grow. That's the only thing that matters here. And today I want to encourage you to do what Samson did. Start letting your hair grow. When was it you cut off all your hair? Stop letting it grow. Do you even remember? Might have been quite a long time ago. Maybe you've been surviving for a long time with no hair. Maybe you think it hasn't hurt you all that much. You still have a job. Still food on the table. Your kids seem to be doing okay. Except when you look in the mirror, there you are, the same as yesterday, in your pathetic, hairless condition. So sad and so unnecessary. Of course, I'm not talking about hair. For us, it's not about hair any more than it was about hair for Samson. I'm talking about the state of our spiritual lives. And the mirror I'm talking about is this mirror, the Word of God. In James chapter 1, it says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do." It's impossible to look in a mirror and not respond. We look into the mirror and we can fix our hair or shave or put on makeup, whatever it's going to take to fix that mess that we see in the mirror. Or we can walk away and do nothing and feel miserable about ourselves the rest of the day. The one thing we can't do is look in the mirror and do nothing. Feel nothing, think nothing. Well, I'm talking about this mirror right here. Whoever looks intently into this mirror, what James calls the perfect law that gives freedom, meaning the Bible, and continues in it, not forgetting what they've heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Samson looked into the mirror when he was a child. He saw a squeaky clean servant of God, a Nazirite with a mission from God. He'd never drank wine. He'd never touched dead bodies. He'd never cut his hair. He was God's person, set apart for God, set apart for the mission that God had given him, ready for action, ready to serve, living in obedience to God's call. And then he scooped honey out of a lion's carcass. Then he had a wedding festival with the wine flowing freely as was customary for the Philistines, even though he wasn't a Philistine, but the girl was, if you remember chapter 14. So now 2 aspects of his precious Nazirite vow have been shattered, and only one aspect of his vow remains intact. He hasn't cut his hair. And now he looks into the mirror and he sees a man who loves the Lord, a man who wants so much to be in a right relationship with the Lord, a man who wants to fulfill his God-given mission. But he sometimes feels weak. He sometimes feels helpless. He looks the part. There's that man in the mirror with all that hair. He looks like a Nazirite set apart for God. He looks the part, and nobody would know any different, but Samson knows. Samson knows all his dark secrets. He knows that his spiritual life is in tatters. He knows that he's a disappointment to God. He's a disappointment to his family. And sadly, he's a disappointment to himself. And then one day he gave up altogether. He said to himself, I'm hopeless. I can't do this. I made such a mess of everything. There's no fixing this. And now his hair is gone, and he's a sad, tragic, pathetic spectacle, a comic remnant of his former self, all used up, hopeless, useless, finished, done. Except, verse 22, the hair on his head began to grow again. I don't know how long Samson's hair was when he died. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that his hair is growing. He was a work in progress. He had reestablished his relationship with God. He'd repented of his sins. He's praying again. He's anxious to serve the Lord. He's wanting to fulfill his mission, which he did in the end in fine style. But the hair on Samson's head began to grow again. I think this is one of the most powerful verses in the whole Bible. It's a message of grace and hope. It says, it's never too late for you. It's never too late to get back in the game. It's never too late to take seriously your obligation to be a Christian and serve the Lord faithfully. Never too late to get right with God. But the hair on Samson's head began to grow again. This says to us, there's nothing you can do to make God stop loving you. Nothing. Samson made a big mess of his life most of the time, but the Lord never stopped loving him, not even for a second. What about us? Maybe today's the day we should start growing our hair out. Maybe today's the day to renew our relationship with God. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Stop giving in to temptation. Stop running away from God. There's a great victory waiting to happen for Samson and for you and for me. I don't know how long Samson's hair was on the day he fulfilled his life's mission and saved Israel from the Philistines. It doesn't matter. It might have been a foot long, might have been an inch long, maybe a millimeter long. Doesn't matter. It was growing. He was allowing it to grow. It wasn't really about hair at all. It just means he wasn't resisting God's will for his life anymore. He wasn't turning his back on God anymore. God was alive in Samson, and God was able to use Samson for the accomplishment of his holy purpose. God was glorified through the life of Samson. How much time have you got left to truly, effectively serve the Lord through a life surrendered to the will of God? 50 years? 20 years? 5 years? 1 year? It doesn't matter. What matters is that we have this opportunity today to say yes to the Lord's will for our lives. We have this opportunity to do what Samson did. An opportunity to say, Lord, Please put me where you can best use me. That's what Samson said that day. That's what we need to say. Let's get on with it. I'm your servant, Lord. Use me for your glory. When he was in the prison with nothing much to do but let his hair grow, he's had time to reflect on his life and time to pray. I think Samson spent some time singing this song, Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. We're going to sing that. This place of prayer is always open for you. If the Lord's calling you to a renewal of your life, like he called Samson to a renewal of his life, then certainly come as we sing. Let's make this our prayer together. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me.